Good morning, everyone. I will be discussing research ethics. To start my report, let's define what ethics means. Ethics is the study of proper action. We are pertaining to research ethics here. So when we say research ethics, this concerns the responsibility of researchers to be honest and respectful to all individuals who are affected by their research studies or the reports of the study's results. When we say research ethics, this is the moral action that we do. Researchers are usually governed by a set of ethical guidelines that assist to make them proper decisions and choose problem actions. So when we say ethical guidelines, it's not just a simple rule, but instead it is a law that we should follow as researchers. We have an example here. So as the researcher, you are interested in sexual behavior as a research topic. You cannot secretly install video cameras in people's bedrooms or houses. However, you could ask people to complete a questionnaire about their sexual behavior. So if you are the subject as well, you will not allow someone to watch and observe your sexual behavior secretly inside your houses. That will be very disrespectful because that is an invasion of privacy. So, always remember, kailangan lagi tayo nagpapaalam. We should always ask permission to the subject before we conduct the research. The ethical principles for research. So, according to American Psychological Association in 2010, first, what measurement techniques may be used for certain individuals and certain behaviors? Okay, so how researchers select individuals to participate in the studies? So titingnan muna kung gaano ka-qualified yung iyong magiging subject dun sa specific study na gagawin mo. So third one is which research strategies may be used with certain populations and behaviors. Kung tama ba yung strategy mo sa research na gagawin in connection dun sa certain population na gagamitin mo dun sa research mo. Fourth one is which research designs may be used with certain populations and behaviors. Fifth is how studies may be carried out with individuals. Paano mo gagawin yung research mo? So number 6 is how data are analyzed, kung tama ba yung magiging analyzation. And number 7 is how results are reported. So we have categories of ethical responsibility. First one is the responsibility to ensure the welfare and dignity of individuals, both human and non-human, who participate in the research study. Okay, so hindi lang human yung kailangan nating protektahan as the researchers. Meron din tayong mga non-human, specifically animals. Second is the responsibility to ensure that public reports of their research are accurate and honest. Of course, when you do a research, you will publish that pag natapos mo. Kapag natapos mo siya, hindi natin siya basta-basta itinatago sa cabinets natin or sa mga libraries. Pinapublish natin siya or somehow yung output natin and the conclusion, sinishare natin dun sa mismong pinag-aralan natin. For example, yung research local mo. Ibibigay mo dun sa research local mo, yung research mo once na natapos mo siya, and the subjects will be informed kung paano ba nag-turn out or kung paano nag-result yung research na ginawa mo sa kanila. So the ethical responsibility, the research situation automatically places the scientist in a position of control over the individuals participating in the study. Yung sinasabing scientist dito is the researcher, tayo yon. So, we have the power, kung tayo yung magiging researcher, tayo yung may power para mag-control dun sa mga subjects natin at so kung ano yung pwede nating gawin sa kanila dun sa research. However, the researcher has no right to abuse this power or to harm the participants or subjects physically, emotionally, or psychologically. Not necessarily, hindi ibig sabihin na meron, as the researcher, tayo yung merong authority, ay ibig sabihin, pwede nating abusuhin kung ano yung power na meron tayo. Researcher has the responsibility to ensure the safety and dignity of the participants. Of course, kailangan may assurance tayo na safe and meron pa ding magiging dignidad yung participants natin dun sa research natin. Responsible authorities. We have the Institutional Review Board, or we call the IRB, reviews research involving human participants. And we also have the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, or the IACUC. Sila naman yung reviews research with non-human subjects naman. So sa animal care sila. However, in the Philippines, meron tayong sinusunod din, or somehow meron tayong committee sa research. We have the Philippine National Health Research System, or we call the PNHRS. Enacted as law na siya noong 2013. So, if you are the researcher and you commit a misconduct in your research, pwede kang makulong. The Philippine Research Ethics. To ensure adherence to the universal principles for the protection of human participants in research and shall, among other things, ito yung kailangan sundin. First is formulate or update guidelines for ethical conduct of human health research. Kailangan updated yung guidelines mo. Kung halimbawa gagawa ka ng research this 2020, i-search mo if updated pa ba yung mga guidelines na sinusunod mo, baka yan ay 1990s something pa. Second is develop guidelines for the establishment and management of ethics review committees and standardization of research ethics review. From the word standardization, ibig sabihin, sinusunod ng lahat ng researchers yung guidelines na sinusunod mo din. Monitor and evaluate the performance of institutional ethics review committees in accordance with procedures outlined to prior agreement. Before you agree na mag-conduct ng research, make sure na pumapayag ka din dun sa mga guidelines na susundin mo before conducting your own research. So promote the establishment or functional and effective ethics review committees, provide advice and make recommendations to PNHRS Governing Council and other appropriate entities. Kapag nagkaroon ka na ng recommendation or ng conclusion dun sa magiging research mo, kailangan nagsasuggest ka nung iyong mga napag-aralan dun sa mga appropriate or mga responsible authorities sa research sa Philippines para naman magkaroon ng sense yung ginawa mo na study. Initiate and contribute to disclosure and discussions of ethical issues in human health research, and network with relevant local, national, and international organizations. Ibig sabihin nito, yung magiging research mo is hindi siya limited sa'yo lang or dun sa mga subjects na napag-aralan mo. Pwede kang mag-suggest ng mga other researches pa na or ideas na pwede pang gawin sa iba. Okay, so pwede mo din siyang i-propose national or international na organizations. So, we have the historical highlights of treatment of human participants. Isipin natin, bakit nga ba natin pinag-aaralan pa tong research ethics na to? Kung pwede naman na as researchers, pwede naman tayo mag-proceed na dun sa mismong research. However, meron tayong mga unethical researches kasi na napagdaanan in our past. So, these are the examples. So, the historical highlights of research ethics. Until the end of World War II, it was assumed that the researchers bounded by their own moral compasses would protect their participants from harm. So we have the Nuremberg Code. This is a set of 10 guidelines from ethical treatment of human participants in research. It laid the groundwork for the ethical standards that are placed today for both psychological and medical research. Ito yung mga guidelines na kailangang sinusunod ng mga researchers for their ethical standards. Hindi lang basta-basta magre-research kasi nga merong naging history before kung saan medyo unethical siya, napahamak yung mga tao or somehow madaming namatay na subjects kaya nagkaroon tayo ng Nuremberg Code na tinatawag. Katumbas niya is the Declaration of Helsinki. This is adopted by World Medical Association in 1964, provides international set of ethical principles for medical research involving humans. Hindi mo pwedeng basta-basta lang pag-eksperimentohan yung mga tao dahil sila ay tao simply because they are humans, and you should be as the experimenter or as the researcher, you should be more of humane. So the Nuremberg Code, we have 10 guidelines here. First one is the voluntary consent of human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent. Under Nuremberg Code, kailangan voluntary na may consent yung subject mo. And yung subject mo na yon, kailangan meron siyang legal capacity to give consent. Kailangan siya nasa legal age and ina-acknowledge ng law yung kanyang magiging decision. So the experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society. Kailangan yun nga, magkakaroon ng sense yung iyong research, hindi lang basta-basta nag-research. Instead, dapat merong kahahantungan na maganda yung iyong magiging research na result. So, okay, so the experiment should be so designed and based on the result of animal experimentation and a knowledge of natural history of the disease or other problem under study that the anticipated results will justify the performance of the experiment. Merong rule na ganito, merong guideline na ganito. As the researcher, bago mo siya i-experiment sa tao, i-experiment muna siya sa animal para malaman mo if mag-work nga yung research mo or yung study mo. So fourth one is the experiment should be so conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering or an injury. Ina-avoid na tong mga unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury dahil nga dun sa pinagdaanan natin in the past. No experiment should be conducted where there is a prior reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur, except perhaps in those experiments where the experimental physicians also serve as subjects. Example nito is the COVID-19, the coronavirus. Meron tayo mga physicians or experimenter na gumagawa ng mga research tungkol dun sa coronavirus or kung meron ba tayong magiging gamot dun sa COVID-19. So bawal mo siyang i-try lang sa mga tao, bigla mo siyang ituturok for halimbawa yung gamot, unless yung isa dun sa researcher ay yung doktor or yung physician na gumagawa mismo ng research. So pwede mo siyang voluntarily niyang ginawa or somehow voluntary lang tinurok sa sarili niya, okay lang yon. Pero hindi mo siya pwedeng basta-basta i-try agad sa ibang tao. So the degree to risk to be taken should never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. Kahit anong experiment or kahit anong research pa man yung ginagawa mo, pinakamahalaga pa din is the humanitarian importance. Proper preparation should be made and adequate facilities provided to protect the experimental subject against even remote possibilities of injury, disability, or death. Kailangan meron kang naging enough preparation or somehow meron ka talagang local or tinatawag na research local laboratory para dun sa research mo. The experiment should be conducted only by scientifically qualified persons. Hindi pwedeng nagre-research ka about psychotherapy tapos businessman yung kapartner mo. So, kailangan qualified siya, scientifically qualified person. During the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end if he has reached the physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to to him to be impossible. Halimbawa, nagkaroon ka ng subject dun sa research mo, tapos somehow, kalagitnaan ng research, na-realize niya na medyo imposible yung research mo. So, meron siyang karapatan na umayaw. During the course of the experiment, the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment at any stage. Halimbawa, medyo kalagitnaan na ng research ni scientist or ni researcher, medyo hindi na gumagana yung experiment niya. So, kailangan prepare ka din na putulin na lang or stop na yung research mo or even mag-back to zero ka or back from scratch. Okay, we have unethical researches from the past. So, ito yung mga famous na mga unethical researches. So, first one is the separating of triplets. This happened in 1970 to 1980. So, separating of triplets, ito yung research na ginawa ng mga psychologists before dun sa nature versus nurture na experiment. So, merong triplets, of course, tatlo sila, na at birth, pinaghiwa-hiwalay sila. So, yung mga triplets na yun known as David Kellman, Robert Shafran, and Eddie Galland. So, pinaghiwa-hiwalay sila at birth to compare heredity and environment, kung ano yung magiging epekto ng heredity and environment sa kanila. So that is very unethical research. So we have the Nazi medical experiments. Iba-iba ng eksperimento, but the famous one is the freezing hypothermia. Ito yung experiment uh, to know how long it would take to lower the body temperature to death. So titingnan nila kung yung mga researchers before, tiningnan nila kung gaano ba kung gaano mate-take nung katawan ng tao yung temperature. So ang ginawa nila, nilagay nila yung victim or yung subject outside, tapos binubuhusan naked of course, binubuhusan nila ng water based dun sa mga temperatures na nire-research nila or kung gaano tatagal dun yung naked body ng tao. So merong dalawang objective dito sa freezing hypothermia. First one nga is kung ano yung kaya na temperature ng body ng isang tao, and number two is paano i-resuscitate yung frozen body pagkatapos niyang lamigin, or pag siya ay 50-50 na, paano siya bibigyan ng resuscitation. Okay. So, third one is we have the Tuskegee study. This is also known as the syphilis study. So, dito sa Tuskegee study, merong hundreds of black men or more of known before as slave people, na tinuturukan sila ng syphilis disease para malaman ng mga researchers kung ano ba yung magiging cure sa syphilis. So, nagkaroon ng control group at saka yung isa ay binibigyan nila ng placebo effect. So, 'di ba tinurukan na sila ng syphilis disease. Tinitingnan nila kung magkakaroon ng cure dito sa mga totoong binibigyan ng cure, and yung isa is the placebo effect lang. So, madaming namatay dito sa Tuskegee study. And last one is the Stanford Prison Experiment. Ito naman yung ini-investigate yung psychological effects ng mga perceived power, focusing on struggle between the prisoners and the officers pag ikaw ay nakakulong. So, experiment lang siya. Supposedly, aware naman yung mga subjects dito, pero kumbaga is sa Stanford Prison Experiment, yung mga prisoners is na-depress sila dahil yung mga umaakto or yung mga subject as the officers, masyado nilang kumbaga na feel nila na sila ay officers. Okay, so we have the APA Ethical Guidelines or the American Psychological Association. Okay, so ito ay law na sinusunod ng mga researchers. So no harm, psychologists take reasonable steps to avoid harming their research participants and to minimize harms where it is foreseeable and unavoidable. When psychologists become aware that the research procedures have harmed a participant, they take reasonable steps to minimize the harm. So kailangan dun sa magiging research mo walang masasaktan psychologically or physiologically. Otherwise, kung unavoidable siya, kailangan sasabihin mo siya. Pero kailangan i-minimize mo or somehow babawasan mo yung pain nung magiging cause of pain or nung harm na mararamdaman nung subject mo. Second one is the privacy and confidentiality. Psychologists have a primary obligation and take reasonable precautions to protect confidential information. Psychologists discuss with persons the relevant limits of confidentiality. Confidential ang magiging research niya and i-explain mo siya dun sa magiging subject mo. However, may limit yung tinatawag nating confidentiality. Not necessary really na sinabi mong confidentiality, eh, ibig sabihin meron pa din siyang limit. Like, for example, hinihingi ng law yung research mo. So, sa confidentiality kasi, merong mga considerations. For example nga is, biglang sa court, hinihingi yung research mo or ang humihingi na ng details about your research is uh, connected na sa court, for example. Kailangan somehow may mava-violate tayo dun sa confidentiality. So, kailangan yun yung naiintindihan ng mga subjects natin as researchers. Okay. So, psychologists may disclose confidential information with the appropriate consent of the individual or another legally authorized person on behalf of the participant unless prohibited by the law. If ever na yung subject mo, for example, ay children, so hindi naman wala namang pwedeng ibigay na consent or wala pa siyang legal consent na pwedeng ibigay sa sarili niya. So, ang hihingan mo ng consent doon is the parents or the guardian. So, institutional approval. When institutional approval is required, psychologists provide accurate information about their research proposals and obtain approval prior to conducting the research. They conduct research in accordance with the approved research protocol. So, institutional approval, for example naman, ang pag-aaralan mo ay mga students. Dun, yung population mo, kailangan magpaalam ka dun sa school na pagkukuhaan mo ng subjects mo. At kung papayag ba sila. Kasi may mga protocol na kailangang sundin doon. Competence. Psychologists conduct research with populations and in areas only within the boundaries of their competence. So, as the psychologist or as the researcher, meron kang boundary kung hanggang saan ka lang pwedeng mag-research or kung anong population lang yung pwede mong gamitin sa research mo. Okay, so psychologists planning to conduct research involving populations, area techniques, or technologies new to them undertake relevant education, training, supervised experience, consultation, or study. Kailangan nagka-qualify ka dun sa research na ika-conduct mo. Psychologists who delegate work to research assistants take reasonable steps to authorize only those responsibilities to such persons can be expected to perform completely on the basis of their education. Yun nga yung, as I mentioned earlier, kailangan yung, if ever na magkakaroon ka ng partner, sa research mo, kailangan yung qualified din dun sa pinag-aaralan ninyo. Record keeping, psychologists create and to the extent the records and under their control maintain disseminate, store, retain, and dispose records of data. So, mahalaga yung record keeping kasi yun yung magiging documentation mo para may proof ka as researcher na totoo yung research mo at basta-basta hindi mo lang siya basta-basta hinulaan or ginawa. Informed consent to research. For persons who are legally incapable of giving informed consent, psychologists nevertheless provide an appropriate explanation, seek the individual's assent, consider such person's preference and best interest, obtain appropriate permission from a legally authorized person if such a substitute consent is permitted or required by the law. Okay. So sorry. Going back, the informed consent here, for example naman, ang gusto mong pag-aralan is the mental health of schizophrenic people sa NCMH. Since yung mga patients naman dun, yung iba dun is basta lang sila naka-confine dun kumbaga or wala silang family na puwede ka kung saan puwede kang magpaalam or puwede kang humingi ng informed consent. Ang iko-consent mo dun is the NCMH itself. So, kailangan magpapaalam ka din. So, we have the psychologists obtain informed consent from research participants prior to recording their voices or images for data collection, unless the research consists solely of naturalistic observations in public places and it is not anticipated that the recording will be used in a manner that could cause personal identification or harm. So speaking of documentation, kailangan pag magdo-document ka or you will take videos or images din sa subject mo, yung magiging observation mo dun sa subject mo is make it sure na natural lang dapat. Hindi pwedeng scripted siya. Kasi kung magiging scripted yung mado-document mo, ibig sabihin invalid na yung research mo. The research design includes deception and consent for the use of the recording is obtained during the debriefing. Later on, mapapag-usapan natin yung deception na tinutukoy dito. And of course, after your research, kailangan magde-debrief ka nung mga napag-aralan mo na subjects. So, dispensing with informed consent, psychologists may dispense with informed consent only where research would not reasonably be assumed to create distress or harm and involves the study and normal educational practices, only anonymous questionnaires, naturalistic observations, which disclosure of responses would not place participants to risk or criminal of civil liability or damage to reputation. So, kailangan anonymous din sila dun sa research mo. The study of factors related to the job or organization effectiveness conducted in organizational settings for which there is no risk to participants, employability, and confidentiality is protected. For example din, nag-research ka about sa job satisfaction ng mga employees. Meron kang isang subject na hindi naging satisfied or somehow very dissatisfied siya dun sa kanyang job. Hindi mo pwedeng i-reveal kung sino yung subject mo na dissatisfied kasi maaari siyang ma-terminate dun sa kanyang work. So, offering inducements for research participation, psychologists make reasonable efforts to avoid offering excessive or inappropriate financial or other inducements for research participation when such inducements are likely to coerce participation. Kapag kasi sa research, magbibigay ka at least ng token or kung babayaran mo ba yung magiging subject mo dun sa research mo. So, kailangan yung magiging, yung subject mo is make it sure, hindi mag-e-excess kung ano yung halaga, kung magkano yung ibibigay mo sa kanya or kung gaano kalaki or kaganda yung token na ibibigay mo. Kasi kung gano'n yung mangyayari, maaaring maapektuhan yung magiging research mo at magpa-participate lang sila para dun sa token na ibibigay mo or then sa any financial reason. So, deception in research. Okay, so psychologists do not conduct study involving deception unless they have determined that the use of deceptive techniques is justified by the study's significant, prospective, scientific, educational, or applied value, and that the effective non-deceptive alternative procedures are not feasible. So dito hindi mo puwedeng, buyuin or lokohin yung iyong subject. Kailangan magsasabi ka ng totoo. Sasabihin mo yung totoong purpose nung research mo. So debriefing. Psychologists provide a prompt opportunity for participants to obtain appropriate information about the nature, results, and conclusions of the research and then take reasonable steps to correct any misconceptions that participants may have of which the psychologists are aware. Magde-debrief ka, for example, naggamit ka ng mga subjects mo. After nung research mo, syempre, pwede kang, kalagitnaan kasi ng research mo, pwede kang maka-encounter ng mga, kumbaga is, yung misconception nung mismong subject mo, kailangan na-explain mo yun sa kanya at masabi mo na lahat ng ginawa mo sa kanya, lahat ng mga procedures or lahat ng participation niya, yun ay for the sake lang ng research. So explain mo kung bakit niya ginawa yun or bakit yun pinagawa sa kanya or somehow bakit siya inobserve. We have the clinical equipoise. This means that the clinicians have an ethical responsibility to provide the best possible treatment for their patient. So in clinical equipoise, clinicians choose the best option for the research subject. Okay, so researcher can compare treatments when there is honest uncertainty about which treatment is best, and there is honest professional disagreement among experts concerning which treatment is best. So, ruling din sa research na kung ano yung magiging best option or best treatment dun sa subject mo, yun yung kailangan mong gamitin. So universally adopting the principle of clinical equipoise would effectively eliminate many common research studies as those involves a no treatment control group or studies that compare an active drug or with a placebo. Kung lahat ng researchers ay susunod dito sa clinical equipoise na sinasabi natin, magiging smooth flow at mapapabilis lahat ng research natin. Okay. So we have the informed consent. Informed consent is given to human participants with complete information about the research and their roles in it before agreeing to participate. They should understand the information and then voluntarily decide whether to participate or not to participate. So sa informed consent, ito ang ibig sabihin nito is pagpapaalam mo. Ma, ah, mag, ah, Magpapaalam ka dun sa, iyong magiging subject kung pwede ba siyang maging subject dun sa research mo. So binibigay ito before mong, i-create yung research or somehow before kayong, mag-conduct before mo siya gamitin dun sa research mo. So components of informed consent, we have three. First one is the information, understanding, and the voluntary participation. The information, researchers tell participants exactly what will be done in the study, but do not explain why. Okay, for example, you will conduct an experimental therapy. There will be disguised measurement, concealed, or even unknown procedures. Pwede mong sabihin dun sa respondent mo or subject mo na mag-undergo siya ng psychotherapy. Pero hindi mo puwedeng sabihin na experimental therapy yung ginagawa mo sa kanya. Kasi, in that way baka ma-manipulate niya or magiging invalid yung research mo. So participants must be informed of any known potential risk. For example nga, magko-conduct ka ika-conduct mo sa kanya. So second component is the understanding. Researchers tell participants about the research does not necessarily mean they are informed, especially in situations in which the participants may be competent enough to understand. So sa understanding, halimbawa ikaw ay researcher, ang subject mo ay merong background about psychology. Hindi mo pwedeng i-inform yung subject mo yung dun sa mismong objective ng research mo kasi mama-manipulate niya yun. Ang kalalabasan nun, invalid yung research mo kasi nga alam nung subject mo kung paano iikot yung research mo. So researchers must express their explanations in terms that the participants can easily understand and should give the participants ample opportunity to ask questions and clarifications. Sa understanding, kailangan ipapaintindi mo ng maigi sa kanya kung bakit siya yung magiging subject mo. And if ever na may question siya, kailangan open ka na pakinggan yung question mo at sagutin ng maayos yung tanong niya. Last one is the voluntary participations. The goal of informed consent is that the participants should decide to participate of their own free will. Participants are completely free to decline participations or to leave the study at any time without negative consequences. Ito yung sense or ito yung role ng informed consent. If ever na medyo umayaw yung participant mo or yung subject mo dun sa research mo, may karapatan siya na umalis dun. May karapatan siyang umayaw, may karapatan siyang bumitaw sa'yo. So, consent form. A consent form contains a statement of all elements of informed consent and a line for all participants' guardians' signature. Sa consent form, ito naman yung the paper itself ng informed consent. Provided before the study so that the potential participants have all the information they need to make an informed decisions regarding participations. So sa lahat ng bagay na gagawin mo na connected sa research or even psychotherapy, kailangan meron kang informed consent. So we have the components of informed consent form. First one is the overview presentation of the goals of the study, why the study is being conducted, and who is responsible for the study and its execution. For example, you will be conducting a psychotherapy. So in overview, I will be conducting a psychotherapy to you. E-explain mo bakit. For example, itong psychotherapy ko is proposed new psychotherapy. Yun. So description of procedures, the clarification of experimental conditions, assessment procedures, and requirements of the participants. So dito naman, you will define psychotherapy, for example, or how it will work. So the risk and inconveniences, statement of physical and psychological risk, and an estimate of their likelihood, inconvenience and demands to be placed on the participants. Okay. So dito sa risk is, for example, you might be triggered with past experiences, you might encounter emotional pain. Sa benefits, a statement of what the participants can reasonably hope to gain from participations, including psychological, physical, and monetary benefits. Siyempre, kailangan i-clear mo din kung ano ba yung mabe-benefit nung subject mo dyan. Ano bang pakialam niya dyan, di ba? So, for benefits, sasabihin mo sa kanya, you will have a chance to reflect on your life or in your past experiences. And the psychotherapy is free, for example, yun yung sasabihin mo. Or you will receive token, you will receive monetary, something like that. So, the cost and economic charges to the participants and payment. Okay, so that is the cost and economic considerations kung kailangan ba niyang magbayad or kailangan mo ba siyang bayaran. So for confidentiality, assurances that the information is confidential and will only be seen by people who need to do so for the purposes of research. Sasabihin mo sa kanya, i-clear mo kay subject mo na ikaw lang ang makakakita nun kung ano man ang mga binitawan niya na personal information, yun ay gagamitin mo lang sa research at kung sino ba yung mga pwede mong pagbitawan nun. So, of course, for example, is the panel, the research panel or your research professor. but the subject will be anonymous. So alternative treatments. So in an alternative treatments, it is in an intervention study, alternatives available to the client before or during participation are outlined. Kailangan magkakaroon ka ng mga options kung ano ba yung pinaka-okay dun sa iyong research subject. Voluntary participation, a statement that the participant is willing to participate and can decline participation now or later without penalty of any kind. So voluntary participation, make it sure na participant mo or yung subject mo is hindi mo pinilit. Hindi mo siya uh, binigyan ng any any harm, or hindi mo siya tinakot para lang makapag-participate dun sa research mo. So questions and further information, a statement that the participant is encouraged to ask questions at any time and can contact one or more individuals. So sa questions and further information naman, hindi lang ikaw yung lagi magtatanong sa kanya. So meron din siyang pwedeng itanong sa'yo, or if ever na may mga hindi siya naiintindihan, ikaw yung tatanungin niya. Signature lines, a place for the participant and the experimenter to sign. Ito yung pinaka-agreement mo, kaya napakahalaga nung signature. Ibig sabihin, nag-agree siya na pumayag sa lahat ng nakalagay sa consent form mo. Research deception. Okay, so when we say deception, this occurs when a researcher purposefully withholds information or misleads participants with regard to information about the study. So kanina napag-usapan natin na minsan ma-violate natin yung research, then pero meron tayong tinatawag na deception. Not necessary, yung research deception, not necessarily tungkol siya sa panloloko. We have two. Ito, gagamitin mo to pagkakailangan na. So, first one is the passive deception, or we call it the omission. It is the withholding or omitting of information. The researchers intentionally does not tell the participant some information about the study. So, may mga hindi ka lang sasabihin na ibang information na dapat ikaw lang ang nakakaalam as the researcher. For example, you will administer psychological tests because you are creating a new test. But instead, your target is the subject. You want to know his test results for a new psychotherapy. So, pwedeng example ng passive deception, pag sasagutin mo siya ng psychological test, sasabihin mo na nagke-create ka ng bagong test. Pero ang talagang objective mo, o ang subject mo is the participant itself. Gusto mong malaman yung information about sa kanya gamit yung psychological test na ibinigay mo. So when we say active deception, or we called it commission, is the presenting of misinformation about the study to participants. The most common form of active deception is misleading participants about the specific purpose of the study. Ito naman, you tell lies na about the research. Okay, for example naman, you tell your student to pass all requirements this week. So, of course, may stress na kasama yon. But your purpose is to observe the stress behaviors among students. Pinagpapasa mo lang sila at akala nung subject mo, which are the students, akala nung mga students, pinagpapasa mo sila na pagkarami-raming requirements. Pero ang totoo mong purpose dun sa study mo ay pag-aralan yung stress management nila, o yung mga behavior nila tuwing nasa stress sila. We have guidelines to follow when we do deception. So according to APA guidelines, identify 3 specific areas of responsibility. First one, the deception must be justified in terms of some significant benefit that outweighs the risk to the participants. Kailangan naman significant magkakaroon ng merong significant benefit kung bakit mo ginamit yung deception. Hindi lahat ng research ay gagamitan mo ng deception. So the researcher cannot conceal from the prospective participants information about research that is expected to cause physical pain or severe emotional distress. So minsan may mga hindi maiitago yung research natin na maaaring maranasan ng participant, kaya tayo gumagamit ng deception. So the researcher must debrief the participants by providing a complete explanation as soon as possible after participation is completed. Kailangan right after na tapos na or somehow hindi mo na kailangang gamitin yung deception, kailangan sabihin mo dun sa participant mo na ginamitan mo siya ng deception at explain mo bakit. Kailangan niyang maintindihan yon. Debriefing. Debriefing is a post-experimental explanation of the purpose of a study that is given to a participant, especially if deception was used. Kailangan nagde-debrief ka talaga after yung research mo, but then mas mahalaga siya kung ginamitan mo siya ng deception. The debriefing serves purposes such as conveying what the study was really all about if deception was used. Tungkol saan ba talaga yung study? Counteracting or minimizing any negative effects of the study, conveying the educational objective of the research, explaining the value of research and the contribution to science of participation in the research, explaining the nature of and justification of any deception use, answering any questions the participant has. So lahat ng 'yon kailangan pagdadaanan mo siya or somehow ita-touch mo siya when you do debriefing dun sa subject mo. If hindi ka magde-debrief ng participant sa research mo, maaaring mag-cause yun ng trust issues na for example, next time na may magre-research hindi na siya magpa-participate kasi nga niloko mo siya, yun yung nasa isip niya. Things that influence debriefing's effectiveness, participant suspicion. So, nagde-debrief ka na, tapos na yung research, akala nung participant mo, inaano mo pa rin siya, kumbaga ginagamitan mo pa din siya ng deception. The nature of deception, debriefing is less effective with active deception. Kasi sa active deception nga, you tell lies. Kaya parang mapapaisip siya or magkakaroon siya ng mistrust sa'yo kung totoo pa ba yung sinasabi mo as the researcher or not. The sincerity of the experimenter or researcher, condescending the experimental, kailangan maramdaman din niya na ikaw ay sincere na dun sa debriefing mo. Hindi na siya on the purpose of the research itself, but purpose niya is para maging okay yung for example is the emotionally kung nag-cause ng emotionally distress yun dun sa participant mo para maging okay yun, maging smooth flow ulit yung kanyang mental health. The time interval between the end of the study and the delivery of the briefing. The sooner debriefing, the better. Confidentiality, a practice of keeping strictly secret and private information or measurement obtained from an individual during a research study. So, kailangan sa confidentiality, hindi ka magbibigay kung ano yung case niya. Kasi syempre, that is a secret between you and the participant only. Anonymity is a practice of ensuring that an individual's name is not directly associated with the information of measurements obtained from the individual. For example, is you conduct a case study or magre-report ka about, you will have a psychological report to your, for example, your colleague. Tapos yung, for example, is a bipolar patient, hindi mo siya pwedeng sabihin na si Juan de la Cruz, siya yung bipolar patient mo. So, instead, just put the name of the client as client X. Basta anonymous siya, hindi mo sasabihin yung identity niya. Strategies of confidentiality. To ensure confidentiality, the following are being applied. No names or other identification appear on data records. For example, hindi mo nga nilagay yung pangalan pero nilagay mo na taga-Arellano University siya, Master of Arts in Psychology. So magkakaroon ako ng idea na, uy, baka si Gerald Alba yun. Okay, so there is no need to link an individual participant to the specific information that he or she provides. Hindi na necessary na ilagay mo yung name niya. Researchers use a coding system to keep a track of which participant names go which sets of data used in situation in which is necessary to reconnect specific names with specific data at different times during a research example. Pwede kang gumamit ng coding or hindi mo siya, pero yung mismong name, hindi mo siya ilalagay dun sa mismong research. Ito ay kung necessary lang na kailangan mong matrack kung sino ba talaga yung participant na sumagot ng ganong klaseng answer. Protection of participants. So according to Institutional Review Board or the IRB, these are their criteria. Minimization of risk to participants. Hanggat maaari, wag nating i-risk yung mga subjects natin or the participants. The reasonable risk in relation to benefits, i-risk mo siya, pero ano ba yung mabe-benefit niya dun? For example, yung kanina, yung sa psychotherapy, i-risk mo na matrigger siya sa mga negative emotions niya, sa mga past pains niya, pero ang benefit nun, marirealize niya lahat ng napagdaanan niya may mga purpose pala. So, equitable selection, informed consent, yan, documentation of informed consent, data monitoring, and privacy and confidentiality. So, of course, we have the ethical issues and non-human subjects in research. Hindi lang tayo nag-aaral tungkol sa mga humans, pinag-aaralan din natin yung mga animals. Like in the past, one of the first experiments na ginawa ng mga psychologists, kinonduct nila sa animals. So ngayon, meron na tayong mga human rights. Kung meron tayong human rights, meron tayong, of course, animal rights. Okay, so reasons why humans use non-humans as subjects. First is to understand animals for their own sake. Siyempre, hindi naman nakakaimik yung mga animals. So may mga researchers talaga na very interested sila kung ano ba yung behavior ng animals. Or kung for example, may emotions ba sila, pinag-aaralan nila yun. So to understand humans, because many processes can be generalized from non-humans to humans. For example, is the dissecting of frog sa biology for example, nung high school tayo. Bakit yung frog yung ida-dissect natin? Of course, kasi hindi natin pwedeng pag-aralan sa biology na ang pag-aaralan natin is the body of human. So, ang gagawin natin, ida-dissect natin yung frog kasi magkatulad sila kumbaga ng set of organs. So, it's better to conduct the experiment or the research dun sa animals. To conduct research that is impossible to conduct using human participants. Yun nga, example, the dissecting of frogs. Alam nga namang mag-dissect ka dun ng tao, diba? That's very unethical naman. Humane care and use of animals in research. So psychologists acquire, care for, use, and dispose of all animals in compliance with current federal, state, and local laws and regulations and with professional standards. Psychologists trained in research methods and experience in the care of laboratory animals closely supervise all procedures involving animals and are responsible for ensuring appropriate consideration of their comfort, health, and humane treatment. Of course, dahil nga madami ng researches na lumabas, meron din mga research about animals na lumabas, kino-consider din natin yung comfort nila, yung health nila, at saka kung paano sila tratuhin. Psychologists ensure that all individuals under their supervisions who are using animals have received instruction in research methods and in the care, maintenance, and handling of the species being used to the extent appropriate of their role. Kailangan kapag magre-research ka about animals, marunong ka mag-alaga dun sa experiment mo, dun sa nire-research mo. So psychologists make reasonable efforts to minimize discomfort, infection, illness, and pain of animal subjects. Of course, kung i-research mo or gagamitin mo siya sa experiment, kailangan naman, katulad lang din ng tao, i-minimize mo yung mga harm at pain na mararamdaman ng animal. Psychologists use a procedure subjecting animals to pain, stress, or privation only when an alternative procedure is unavailable, and the goal is to justify by its respective scientific, educational, or applied value. Anything na ginawa mo dun sa animal, it's just because of educational purpose or the research purposes lang. Psychologists perform surgical procedures under appropriate anesthesia and follow techniques to avoid infection and minimize pain during after surgery. So parang tao na din sila, bibigyan mo sila ng anesthesia to minimize the pain para hindi ganun kasakit kapag may ginawa ka ng experiment or research dun sa animal. When it is appropriate that an animal's life be terminated, psychologists proceed rapidly with an effort to minimize pain and in accordance with accepted procedures. So error versus fraud. When we say error, this is an honest mistake that occurs in the research process. Pag sinabing error, normal yon na somehow magkaroon ng pagkakamali yung research mo. But when we say fraud, this is an explicit error of a researcher to falsify or misinterpret data. Ibig sabihin, nagsinungaling ka dito sa research mo. Ninakaw mo pag fraud. Ang error, natural na magkamali ang isang researcher dun sa research niya. Pag fraud, ninakaw mo yung research ng ibang researcher. So we have the researcher's misconduct. Common reasons why researchers commit fraud. First is due to competitive nature of an academic career. Ibig sabihin na pe-pressure na yung mga other researchers sa academic career nila, kaya nagkakaroon ng fraud, dadayain na lang natin kasi para tumaas yung rank natin sa academic career natin. So pressure of publish and or perish. Pag publish or perish, ito yung principle niya is yung magpa-publish ka ng research or matatanggal ka sa work. Parang ganun siya. So, pressure on peer review. Sa peer review, kapag kasi nag-research ka, syempre, re-reviewin niya nung mga panel, nung iba pang mga board of trustees ng research. So, nagkakaroon ng pressure dun sa researcher na madami pa kasing ipapa-revise or somehow madaming flaws yung research niya. Kaya ang ginagawa nila, nagkakaroon ng misconduct, dinadaya nila yung research. They are overworked, underfunded, and underpublished. More of sa mga industrial setting kasi ganito. So pag hinihingan ng research yung isang employee, for example, overwork na nga siya, hihingan mo pa ng research, tapos hindi mo naman bibigyan ng fund or somehow ng allowance para dun sa research niya. Tapos hindi mo pa din ipapublish, basta na lang itatago for example sa cabinet ng offices. So ibig sabihin, kumbaga nadi-discourage na yung mga researchers para gawin yung kung ano yung ethical. Replication. When we say replication, it is the repetition of research study using the same basic procedures used in the original. Iba to sa plagiarism naman, kasi ang replication naman is magbe-base ka lang naman dun sa napag-aralan na research. Susundan mo lang siya, but not necessarily you will copy it. Pag sinabi natin plagiarism, it is the unethical representation of someone else's ideas or words as one's own. Reference citations must be included in a researcher's paper whenever someone else's ideas and work has influenced his or her thinking and writing. Always give credits. Sa plagiarism, halimbawa, merong quotations na sinabi siya about sa article niya, tapos gagamitin mo siya sa essay mo. So, hindi mo basta-basta pwedeng ilagay lang yung mismong quotation niya doon. Instead, lalagyan mo siya ng credit na yung taong yon, yung researcher na yun ang nagsabi nun. Preventing plagiarism. So this is according to Myers and Hanson in 2006. First is take complete notes including complete citation of the source. Ito yung paano natin maiiwasan yung plagiarism. So kung halimbawa kung ano yung nabasa mo dun sa article or dun sa research niya, i-take down notes mo na yun tapos i-cite mo kasama yung mga sources para ma-prevent natin yung pandadaya or misconduct. Within your paper, identify the source of any ideas, words, or information that are not your own. May kukunin ka lang, 'pag kasi sinabing kanina yung replication, 'pag sinabi kasing ire-replicate mo, may kinuha ka lang na idea. Ngayon sa plagiarism, kinuha mo yung mismong idea. So, to avoid that kind of thing, isulat mo lang yung kung saan ka ano yung nag-caught up nung attention mo dun sa sinabi nung study or nung article or nung research na yun. Tapos isulat mo kung ano yung sinabi niya. Puwede mo yung dagdagan para hindi mo masabi na plagiarism yung ginawa mo. So identify any direct quotes by quotation marks and the beginning and of the quotes and indicate where you got them. Be careful about paraphrasing. It is greatly tempting to lift whole phrases or catchy words from another source. Use your own words instead to use direct quotes. Be sure to give credit to your sources. Pag magpa-paraphrase ka naman, ah, same thought but, ah, different words. Puwedeng gano'n sa paraphrasing. So, fifth one is include a complete list of reference at the end of the paper, kasama yung mga articles na nabasa mo including the pages, and pagka sa internet mo naman siya kinuha, yung link. If in doubt about whether a citation is necessary, cite your source. You will do no harm by being especially cautious. Pagka minsan kasi may mga articles, wala kung sino yung nag-publish or somehow sino yung nagsulat nung article. So pagka gano'n, halimbawa sa magazine mo siya nabasa, i-cite mo na lang kung ano yung magazine na pinagbasahan mo and yung page. These are my references in this report. Thank you for listening.